Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I've been doing some research of one of the people you told me to read about, a Mr. Olof Rudbeck, or I should be more precise, Olof Rudbeck den Äldre. Ooh, titles. So for the people who are not aware, Olof was the man who claimed that Sweden was the lost city of Atlantis that Plato talked about. So he's quite a figure. Olof was born in 1630, and the time after this, in 1700, 1600s, it's a very important time for Sweden. For Swede, we will define its time as Stormaktstiden. And Stormaktstiden for Sweden is the golden age of our kingdom. So it started with Gustav II Adolf, which learned a new military tactic, mixing pikemen together with gunners. And with that, he conquered most of the north, made Sweden one of the most powerful empires in Europe during the time. Because of this, there was a lot of thinkers in Sweden that was of very high importance. Some that I think I will talk about in the future, such as a man called Swedenborg, but that's another story for another day. Olof Rudbeck wasn't a small potato either. He was a genius, to say the least. You might have heard of Carl von Linné. It was the man who categorized all the species. So if you ever see a flower, it has a Latin name. He's the one who did that. So he's very important. But Olof Rudbeck was one of the previous ones of him. So Linné used Olof as a source to continue the work on categorization of species. So Olof got an assignment. He has to map out the center of Sweden, sort of the part of Sweden where usually weren't mapped out. And because of the technology during the time, he had the tools to do that. So when he started beginning mapping, he started seeing similarities to Plato's Atlantis, and mostly in heights of mountains and a few things of that. So he started mapping out, not only to do a map, but to do a comparison. And he found out that the land of Uppsala must have been the capital of Atlantis. He had an idea that Uppsala, for example, correlated to one of Plato's ideas, and the church, Uppsala's main church, was the temple that Plato talked about. Again, I mean, as an idea, this sounds weird, and everybody goes, ha, funny man, Atlantis. No, but what was important with this wasn't that was Atlantis. No one really cared scientifically, like he was mocked scientifically for this. I mean, the methods he used to map this out was very impressive, but otherwise they mocked him for this. But Atlantis' idea is completely irrelevant. He's a funny guy. Hey, laugh. No, but what he actually did and what he sort of created was a new romanticized nationalism. This was the entire point of Atlantis. The point was not to prove Atlantis is real. The point is to prove that Sweden has a main center of the world. From Sweden, in particular, every sort of greatness of European history was built from Swedish people, and in particular Goths. So you heard many ideas, probably, if you know sort of Swedish romanticized history, that Sweden, for example, created Russia, that the Goths are Swedes, that obviously took over Spain, North Africa, the Roman Empire, Italy during the time. And with that sort of movement of Swedish people, it explains, through this romantic nationalist, how Sweden is very important. And in a way, depending on how far you want to push this, is the center of Europe and is why all other European nations should bow down for Sweden, especially during a time where expansionism was very important for Sweden. They wanted more and more land. Pomerania, Estonia, the rest continue taking. And if it didn't stop, we would have taken more and more and more. All of North Europe would have been ours. And it is to create a political incentive to state that this land belongs to Sweden. So even if we conquered all of Europe, the idea was, well, that belongs to us, because Gothic expansion and Gothic people took over Europe, and therefore, Swedes should have the land. I make those meanings quite a lot, if you know me, but that's kind of the idea of it. So this idea is called Göticism. It was mostly Swedish nationalism, but it was also to explain old runes and explain sort of a history of Sweden. So it wasn't all nationalism, it wasn't all politics, it was just explaining sort of the people, like who are the people of Sweden? Well, we're the Goths. All right, well, then we can expand upon that. So most of the people during this time, during the bigger time, like if you think Masons had a lot of influence during that, which they did, the Gothism people had quite a lot of influence. Gothic organizations, they were some of the greatest Swedes during the time was part of it. They're even alive till this day, by the way. They're still active, and if it wasn't for COVID, you could visit them, and they have interesting things. And if you remember, in our Beethoven Aspa video, we talked about how the idea of Finnish as the original language was more about nationalism, which is true. That's why he wrote it. And that's why August Strindberg said that Hebrew is the original language. It's not for any scientific reasons, it's nationalistic reasons. Because if it's Hebrew, then it means that the king of Sweden has the right to rule. Because August Strindberg was a Gothist, or Gothism, as part of Gothism. So this Swedish nationalism during the 1700s up until, quite a long time, was built upon this idea. This is why we need to conquer more. This is why Russia are below us. This is where everyone is below us. We are the Goths. So the idea that Sweden being Atlantis is not about literally being Atlantis. It's just trying to find a justification of expansion and nationalism in Europe. Why should Swedes rule? Why should the Gothic people sort of rule? Well, it's because X, Y, and Z. Atlantis, or Hebrew, or something else.